So one of my first pieces that I mentioned there was when I visited there some of the advanced stats for Paul and Barnes, and so I'm going to kind of go through what I wrote in the piece and just kind of give away some other extra takeaways from reading or from writing that piece. So regarding their defensive numbers, I had made a chart that basically I've been using the last few years where I have all the Spurs players' numbers, and they're basically broken down by per 36 stats. And I also include some hustle stats in there, like deflections and things like that, or contested shots as well. And so what I did was I took Paul's data from the Warriors last season, and I took Barnes's data from the Kings, and I added them to that group of Spurs players, the players that are going to be on the team next season that are already under contract. So that's kind of where I showed them, and I just kind of want to see what really sticks out, either positive or negative, when we look at Paul's data and Barnes's data. And one thing I do want to note though, before I go into some of the numbers, is that we got to remember that context is very, very important here. Paul's playing on the Warriors with the four other teammates, different teammates in lineups that are going to be brand new on the Spurs, and then same thing for Barnes. He's playing with the Kings during all of this data. So there is you have to take that element into the equation here of knowing that there was different teammates that are not going to be there when these two players are out on the floor. They're going to have brand new teammates in their new Spurs teammates. But let's just go through the numbers and see kind of what they show. So regarding Barnes defensively, one of the areas that he really stuck out on positively was that he doesn't foul so much. So that was one of the metrics that I saw compared to other Spurs players where he really stood out here, where he only committed 1.5 fouls per 36 minutes. So that was a positive for Barnes, and that's a staple of Greg Popovich's defense. He doesn't want players out on the floor who are going to be getting a lot of fouls. The Spurs are typically a team that ranks very well and not putting opponents on the free throw line. They don't want to get in too much foul trouble, so that's one of their staples of their defense, and that's something that defensively Harrison Barnes is right away going to add to the team, whether he's guarding threes or fours out on the wing or in the low block. It's going to be one of the attributes he brings to this team is not getting into foul trouble. One of the negatives for him that I saw in the data was his defensive rebounding. So he only collected 2.8 defensive rebounds per 36 minutes. That was pretty low. If he was on the Spurs last season, that would have been pretty low there. When you look at the data. And one thing I did want to notice is, again, like I mentioned, you got to go with some context. Who is he out on the floor on? And so when you look at the Kings' data from last season, he was out on the floor a lot with both Sabonis, Domantas Sabonis, and Keegan Murray, who both collect a lot of defensive boards. So that's one thing to consider, is that those guys really get a lot of boards. So maybe that's something that still I think Barnes should have still stood out a little bit more there on the Kings, considering he was probably like the third tallest player out in lineups with Sacramento at different points. And so that's something to kind of watch, is that how is he going to impact the defensive rebounding? I know Wemby's of course going to collect a bunch of boards throughout games, but if it's not Sohan, then the Spurs are really going to need Barnes there to help out Wemby if he can't be near that ball to get a defensive board. So that's something interesting to watch. Seeing, is that more of can Barnes improve that number, that defensive rebounding number? And it also might also go back to where was he standing out of the court? Maybe he's guarding a lot more perimeter players, and so maybe those rebounds are closer to the rim, and he was just not presently near that area. So again, that's kind of stuff that we'll watch for as the season unfolds. Regarding Paul, one of the areas that stood out positively when I looked at his data was his steals and deflections numbers with the Warriors. So Paul averaged 1.6 steals per 36 minutes. That would have been, that would have averaged, looked very well on the Spurs last season. And then his deflections numbers were very high as well. 2.7 deflections per 36 minutes. Again, that would have stood out very well if he was on the Spurs' roster. And just the thing that I think Paul can actually up this number just a little bit. And the reason why I say that is because he's going to have, a better defensive anchor there down in the paint, with Wemby. He's going to be allowed to, gamble a little bit more out on the perimeter, maybe just swiping for some steals and not feel like even if his opponent goes by him, he's going to now have somebody there to protect the paint and kind of be that secondary option in protecting the rim in Wemby. Same thing for his deflections. Maybe he's going to try to get into more passing lanes, those kind of things. So again, I feel like he can gamble a little bit more, knowing now that he has that protection of having Victor behind him in the front court. So I think that's an area where I think Paul can either keep those same stats or even up them just a little bit more now that he is joining San Antonio. So that was the defensive data that I wrote about for both Barnes and Chris Paul. Now, the next numbers I look at are the drives data. So this is provided by Second Spectrum publicly by the NBA. So this is Second Spectrum has a lot of different stats. Most of those are private. Only teams or like certain media outlets have access to those stats. But these are the ones that they actually provide publicly to the NBA. And so what I do is I kind of collect those stats. Amongst the main key players who put the ball on the floor for the Spurs last season, and then I made my own metric where I kind of look at the rates in terms of what percentage of the time does the player do this or do that. And so that's kind of where where these numbers come from. So what I've done here is I've put Barnes and Paul in these stats and kind of looked at, how would they look compared to other Spurs players. And so here's what kind of stood out to me when I looked at some of this data for the drives. For Barnes first, so he's mainly going to be a little bit more like, I would say, like Keldon Johnson, where he's gonna try to take a shot if he does put the ball on the board, on the floor and drive. He's mostly going to try to shoot the ball. 50% of the shot last season, 50% of the time he drove the ball last season, he did shoot it. Although he made it pretty well. He made 54% of his drives. So again, he was efficient in that number. The fact that he's getting over a point per shot when he did drive the ball. Another positive for him that he's going to help the Spurs if he does this is he's going to get to the foul line a little bit more on his drives when he does have to drive the ball, and that's something that they were missing. They didn't really have a lot of players who got to the foul line much on their drives, and so that's going to be an area where Barnes will help. Another positive for him is that even though he's driving and he takes shots more often when he does drive or gets to the foul line, he doesn't turn the ball over as much. He has a very low turnover percentage on those drives. And then lastly, one of the only negatives I saw for him was that he doesn't really collect assists or pass out when he does drive. So again, when he's determined to drive the ball, whether it's secondary action or he's the third playmaker on an action, he's going to make sure to basically he has that determination to try to put up a shot and either create for himself or try to get fouled by the defense. So again, that's kind of my takeaways from looking at Harrison Barnes' drive data. And I will note that, he's not going to be a player where you give him the ball every single possession, he's going to go drive it. He's more so, like I said, he's like that third or fourth option in an offensive set. If he's more of I'm going to talk about later, he's more of a read and react player. If he sees he has a matchup he thinks he can exploit, he's going to attack that matchup and try to get downhill against that player. So that's something notable about Harrison Barnes' drive numbers. Regarding Chris Paul's drive numbers, it's basically what you see in the eye test. He's not a player, especially at this stage of his career, getting close to 40, where he's going to be basically, try to score the ball. He's mainly going to, if he's driving, it's because he's already looking for that next pass of who's he going to kick out to, where can he find a cutter, where can he find somebody out on the arc. And so that's what we see here in the numbers is that 51% of the time he did pass out to a teammate. So that's going to be a good opportunity for Spurs players to either make some near the rim or if they're open out on the 3-point line. Of course, Chris Paul is great at taking care of the ball, and so that's what we see in his drives numbers. The times that he does put on the floor and try to get to the basket with his drives, he does he doesn't turn it over often. And then one of the only minuses I see, but again, it's more so at this point of his stage of his career, he doesn't really attack the rim as often in terms of putting up layups or getting fouled. So that's one thing I noted was that his foul percentages, getting to the free throw line percentage is very low, for Paul. But again, it's kind of expected, at his age and the fact that if he's driving in, he's mainly going in to try to create for his teammates. When we look at the post-ups numbers that are also provided by Second Spectrum, this is another area where I think Harrison Barnes is going to add a little bit more dynamic ability to the Spurs' offense, where last season it was basically the Spurs' three go-to post players were Wemby, Zach Collins, and then Jeremy Sohan. And I would say Sohan was like not all, his post-ups were not as frequent as Collins and Wemby. They would only go to Sohan, if there was like, it was getting late into possession, that was like the only option on the offense. That's kind of what they did. Well, now what happens is now Harrison Barnes is very much in that Sohan realm where, you're not going to go to him every single possession, throw it down there, but you're going to go to him if he has like a mismatch or if it's like, you move the ball around, there's not a good shot anywhere. And so, you'll go to Harrison Barnes post-up. And so that's kind of what the Spurs will do now that they have a fourth option there, a player who can go in the post, and that is Harrison Barnes. So that's kind of what I mentioned there, is that he's more so like another secondary post option, again, late in the shot clock kind of thing going on here. When he did take shots in the post, he did make them very well. So he made 50% of his shots in the post, which is more efficient than what Sohan shot last season. I think it was like a 33%. I'll put the numbers on the screen. And then lastly, one thing we noticed about Barnes is like, unlike Wemby, who might he might either shoot when he's in the post or he might pass out and look for a cutter or someone out wide open. Barnes is mostly going to take the shot. If he gets the ball in the post, he's most likely looking to try to score try to put up some points when he's in the post. So again, I think that he adds a little bit more versatility in their offense, especially in their late shot clock offense. If that's another option now they can go to if they see that Barnes has a mismatch or if it's late in the shot clock, they can go to Barnes down there in the post. The last number that I looked at for both Paul and Barnes compared to Spurs players was crunch time data. So this is the final 5 minutes of a game when the team is either ahead or behind by 5 points. And so just some takeaways from Barnes and Paul. So one positive for Barnes is that he shot very well from the free throw line with the Kings in crunch time. He shot 13 of 16 from the floor during crunch time, 81% free throw accuracy. So again, if there's a situation where Barnes ends up getting fouled late in the game and maybe the Spurs have the lead or they got to score a free throw just to push themselves over the lead, well, then Harrison's that player who doesn't really get shy and he's going to be okay shooting the ball there at the free throw line is what the data is telling us. One of the minuses, though, for him at the in crunch time last season with the Kings was that he really got cold from three. He only shot 2 of 12 from three in crunch time, 17%. And so that's something where, you know, the Spurs players overall, they kind of struggle in that department when the final 5 minutes of making those late game threes. And so that's where they're going to need some help. And so they got to see if Barnes can try to improve that percentage when he's in the final 5 minutes, because during the normal game, he actually shoots pretty well from three, as I'm going to talk about here a little bit later. And then lastly, Paul, what stuck out to me positively was his ball security. He's going to take care of the ball. So last year in his crunch time minutes with the Warriors, he had 11 assists to just 4 turnovers. So again, that's an option that the Spurs will need if he's playing in crunch time. You know, if he's out there on the floor, he's going to at least, you know, get the players in their sets, find the best shot that's out there, whether it's for Victor or Devin Vassell or someone like that. But kind of just get the players where they need to go and not turn the ball over, and that's crucial, especially because there were some times in games where the Spurs players, you know, they were young players, so of course, you know, they're going to have some turnovers with the pressure, you know, on their shoulders. So that's kind of something that we kind of saw in the data of what Chris Paul and Harrison Barnes should bring to the team.